Hello YouTube and welcome to this very special video. In a minute I'll be showing you the interview I conducted with Juan Echinique, a lead designer and writer on the upcoming Skyrim board game. In the interview we talked about the story of the game, the lore of the game, the involvement of Bethesda Game Studios in the writing, their approach to the lore in general, and much more pertaining to story and lore. Now, before you watch this interview, I recommend you watch at least part of Modiphius' first look playthrough of the game to familiarize yourself with the way of storytelling that the game has, so you understand some of the concepts that we're talking about in this interview, and so you'll understand why I'm so excited about the game. A link to that playthrough is in the description. It's not necessary, but it's going to make it a bit more understandable for you when we talk about certain game mechanics or game concepts. With that said, I want to thank Juan for taking the time to sit down with me and the company Modiphius for making this possible, which is the company that makes the board game. One last thing, I have not been sponsored by them, so all the questions were mine and were motivated out of my own curiosity, as is my own hype for this game. And now, I'd like to say, enjoy our conversation.
What's the purpose of this board game as support of the story of the video game in a way? How does it complement each other? Because the fact that starting 25 years before the video game, right at the very end of the Great War, it's a very interesting thing here because it gives us a chance of using the Thalmor and the Almeri Dominion as a sort of continuous negative presence across the story. Even when the story moves forward in the second campaign 25 years later to the age of the Dragonborn, that presence is still felt.
Yeah, they're still there.
Yeah. When you're the Dragonborn, it doesn't matter that much because you're the Dragonborn, you can ally with whoever you want. But if you are an ex-Blade who was fighting against them, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. It's just something I wonder about the lore. Did you guys make a distinction, if it's even relevant, between the Thalmor after the Great War, simply hunting for the Blades, and then later for Talos worshippers? Or did you guys not really make a distinction between that? Or is that not relevant to the game in that sense?
It is in a way, but we try to steer clear as much as possible from Talos. It's mentioned there's a whole story about Talos, but Talos is such an important presence for the Nords, for the Civil War, and for the Dragonborn that we decided to touch it only as a secondary thing and focus more on how the Thalmor are involved in the Hunt of the Blades. I mean, these characters are already being hunted for who they are. And in fact, in the second campaign, 25 years later, the same characters are in hiding. So there's a whole cloak and dagger mechanic where their whole existence depends on their identities being kept hidden from the Thalmor. So there's a whole thing. And I'm going to take a step back to Moiva Karnai again, because this is a thing from the start of the game that I always find it pretty sweet, that during the tutorial of the game, you're playing Moiva Karnai. That's the character you're playing in what happens before the start of the game. It's a prequel of a prequel, great, but I
should have played the tutorial because now I want to.
Yeah, I'm hinting you here. I'm putting a bit of bait in front of you. The tutorial is not super interactive. It's basically guiding you to understand the rules, which is very important in this case. But the story that it's telling you is what Moiva Karnai is doing right before the characters start the game. So it's kind of misleading when you think like, oh, the game is about Moiva Karnai and her heroic activities. Oh, wait, no, no, it's not that easy. No, well, she's getting paid at least. Well, good for her.
All right. Well, one thing I really liked about seeing in the first look playthrough was seeing Carlia in the Thieves Guild part, but there she was a lot younger, and all the stuff that happened in Skyrim hasn't happened yet. Are there like more characters that we might see in the game that are younger now?
Yeah, plenty. You have Carlia is there. You have at the very beginning you can face Mercer Frey.
Mercer Frey. Yeah.
As a younger thief that actually steals your money and you need his help, and the only way to get his help is to keep on giving him money, keeps on taking your money. It's a pretty hilarious encounter.
Kind of in character as well.
It's very in character. You meet Mjol the Lioness as a young woman, a young adventurer. You meet Rorik, the founder of Rorikstead.
Oh, that's cool.
And Joan Manet, his best friend. You meet them right after the Great War when Rorik is wounded, Joan is saving his life. The whole story they have in Skyrim, which is always...
Oh, that's so cool.
Whispered. Yeah, you have a whole plot about saving Rorik's life and how Joan Manet is there as his best friend trying to help you save his life. There's a whole thing there. The big one here is the Jarl of Markarth and King Madanach. The
About
third chapter. It's an
about the
important one.
Markarth Incident. Well,
Yeah.
that's actually something that I wrote down before this conversation. In the day, this is in like the early days of my channel when I didn't even have a good microphone yet. I made a video on the Markarth Incident, and something I then found out was there are so many different conflicting accounts on the Markarth Incident with whether Ulfric actually did like atrocities back then or how Madanach's rule was. There are many conflicting accounts, and like the game isn't really is presenting this really grey moral on that sense, and you're kind of sort of free to choose the Imperial or Stormcloak narrative. Are you clearing some things up, or are you keeping that still morally grey for the player, like the role of Madanach and the role of Ulfric in that?
I mean, that's a really good question because it leads to so many places. First, the fact that Skyrim left that as a legend that you never know what really happened, it's great. Second, this leads to a bigger answer, but it's important. One of the things we tried was to avoid dictating the choices of the Dragonborn. So any moment where the players are going to do something that would be chosen by the Dragonborn, for example, the Siege of Solitude. We cannot portray the Siege of Solitude. What if the player wanted to side up with the Imperial? So that couldn't happen. So all the choices and all the story needs to be surrounding those fixed events. We can talk about the Siege of Whiterun because it will happen no matter what. But if it's based on player agency, we need to avoid it so players can have both experiences and make them compatible.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way of writing. It's maddening, but it's very interesting. By that, we came up with what we called Schrödinger's narrative, like Schrödinger's cat, but with a narrative, which is the choices you make now may affect the truth that was being told before. If you're, for example, investigating who's the murderer in a whodunit scenario, and you make choice A, the murderer becomes this, even though the murderer murdered somebody before that. You know. So the moment you choose something, you may be collapsing an option that was open in the air. So that applies a lot to the whole Markarth Incident. There's a whole thing with Ulfric marching across Skyrim, and with you approaching the Jarl of the Reach. You approaching Madanach, you talk to Madanach, you meet Madanach, you even get to see how his bard jumps, makes the leap with the poetic Ada. You remember that plot? I love that plot. There's you find the ghost of a bard close to the Reach.
Right, yeah, I remember vaguely doing that quest, but it's been such a long time.
It's so small, so subtle, so nothing.
It's really cool that you included that, actually.
Yeah, and you meet the bard and you're there guarding him from the Hag Ravens while he recites his poem and jumps and dies. There's nothing you can do to save him because he dies, but it's an honorable death, and if you do that path, you meet Madanach, he laughs like crazy saying, that's a good death. But we got to do that. And by the point the Jarl of Markarth dies after Madanach is kicked out, it's supposed to be that the rich man maybe killed him. That's the official story. But there are parts in the story where you actually kill him and blame it on the rich man, and other parts where he actually dies in an accident and people blame it on the rich man, and other parts where the rich man killed him. So what's the truth?
Oh, that's cool.
Depends on your choices. Depends on what you do.
Well, that way you give you give a new perspective on the Markarth Incident without really taking away that sort of moral decision that you might have to make in Skyrim on which story to believe. I really like that. That's really cool.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a really cool way of writing. It can mess with the brain a lot because you have to think backwards instead of forwards. It's really weird once you get into the train, but it can lead to very interesting positions. And I'm going to give you another example. There's a side quest, a personal quest about a character named Tyler, who's not defined. Across the whole game, he appears and he's got a long story, but you never get to know if he's a Nord, he's an Imperial, if he's an Argonian. You never get to know anything about him. Depending on the choices you make, suddenly he's a monster, suddenly he's an undead, suddenly he's your friend, suddenly he's in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He's amnesiac, he's not. There's so many things that can happen with that character, and it's all Schrödingerian. So the origin story of that character changes depending on your choices.
Your game is so much more expansive than I even thought that it would be. This sounds so really cool.
It's really fun. And to make a wink and a nod at this whole Tyler situation and this character, his images are always silhouettes. You never see his face because it's your choices what define him. That's the maximum exponent of this Schrödinger's narrative thing that we were carrying on, but it's all across the whole thing. And it helps us preserve the agency of the video game and the agency of the player, and making each story more unique. Because the choices you did change everything, change the story.
Yeah, I honestly don't want to sound like a hopeless fanboy, but this sounds really, really cool.
I hope we live up to that hype, but the concepts are good. The concepts are really solid.
I mean, from what I've seen from the early playthroughs in the tabletop simulator, it's exactly the way at least I would want a Skyrim board game to look. But I do have another question on lore, if you don't mind. In the lore, after the Markarth Incident, Ulfric gets imprisoned by the Imperials, and then in prison he gets to hear that his father, Hogue Stormcloak, who is like the Jarl of Windhelm, that he dies. Is that also a plot in the game, or is that already after the playtime of the game? Because I believe it's like 2 years after the Markarth Incident, so I can imagine that you didn't include that, but
yeah, it happens in that gap. Happens literally in that gap. We thought about that story, and we thought about getting closer to that character, to Ulfric, because he's a fascinating guy. You never know if you should love him, hate him, if he's a hero, he's a villain. There's so many ways of looking at him. If he's just ambitious, or if he's a Thalmor spy. There's even a theory about that. So there's a lot packed in there. But we couldn't get closer to that because of the timeline. We would have to create a plot point that makes characters wait 2 years. That would be like, oof, how do we do that? That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I was just wondering, since it's kind of close, but on the other end.
Yeah, but what's interesting is that you get to see the moment where Ulfric is captured before going to Helgen. Some players get to fight for the Stormcloaks, and at the beginning of one of the chapters, the first thing you do is go in there and face the other players, the Imperials, in a series of skill tests. And depending on who he was, one thing happens or another. But Ulfric always gets captured and always gets sent to Helgen. So you witness that moment.
But do you get to like also play maybe on the side of the Imperials, where they kind of ambush Ulfric during the?
You do both things. If you play four-player games, 2 players are going to be Imperials, 2 players are going to be Stormcloak, and you will have 2 and 2. There's no way around it. That's how one of the chapters begins. And when you start reading it, if you know the video game and you have all the references, like, oh wait, is this happening for real? I'm fighting with Ulfric, and we're going to this place, and he's getting captured. Oh no!
Oh, this is where Skyrim begins. Hey, wait, I'm back in the cart now.
There's a black screen, the logo, and then here we go. Yeah.
You sold me Skyrim again.
It's a classic, yeah. And the same thing about the choices. It's a complicated one in Dawnguard, because we wanted to incorporate the Dawnguard and Clan Volkihar, otherwise what's the point?
Yeah.
But it's also tied up with the Dragonborn's choices that we had to swim around it a lot. We got something really good, but I'm not going to lie about the difficulty of doing that without interfering with player agency, because
I can imagine.
We're very involved in that idea, very invested in that.
One last thing that I wondered about for the lore. When you write the narrative, do you take the game world literally, or do you take like the lore version of the world literally? Like, for example, in the lore version, Whiterun is this massive trading city. Well, of course, in the game, due to game limitations, it's only like, I don't know, 20, 30 buildings or whatever. Just a personal wondering what kind of version of the game you took into account while writing the narrative.
That's a very good question, and I haven't really thought about that in depth, because as we are writing text, we're not writing a graphic novel or any other visual format. Writing is abstraction. So we are 3 designers here, Javier, Stefan, and myself, and we're the ones doing all the writing. And the fun thing is that the few times we clash in ideas, that happens, of course, is often because we have different visions of what the game is, different perspectives. If I imagine Whiterun, as you say, as an expanding megapolis with thousands of houses, and Stefano sees it as in the video game, it's 24 buildings, come on, get over yourself. That can lead on occasion to this kind of clashes where I write something like, you see in the horizon the thousands of houses. Hey man, it's just 24. What are you saying?
Yeah. But I mean, I can imagine that it's not important for like the narrative, since it's of course story based and not really a graphic novel, like you said. But I was just wondering, like, what kind of version of the world the designers took into account. So it's just something that I wondered while I was watching the first look playthrough. But I can also imagine that maybe you didn't really think about it consciously.
It's a mix. It is a mix because there are things that are not included in the video game, things that are mentioned, things from other games, and there are things that are insinuated. And we're hooking up so much to the insinuations and the whispers and the rumors to be able to build something bigger. That often we go off script regarding the video game and more on script regarding the lore. For example, the Brotherhood, the Dark Brotherhood, is supposed to be this huge organization with I don't know how many members, and in the video game it's like 7 people.
It's because in the video game they're like the last sanctuary left after everything completely fell apart.
But if you're an organization of 7 people or 9 people, you don't call one of them Brotherhood Initiate. They should have a name at least. If you have someone called Initiate, that would mean that you have at least 50 people. You can forget the name of someone.
Yeah, and you also have like the random assassins that sometimes come for you, which don't have a name, but they're just called Brotherhood Assassin. So yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from there.
So yeah, we imagine the Brotherhood as a much larger organization, even though it's been reduced, its last sanctuary, but we imagine it as a much larger organization than the 7 people that you meet in Skyrim, which are great, but we imagine that there are more. Yeah, but it's a very interesting question now you mention it, and now I have to think about many things through that lens. Because I didn't catch that trick before. That's a really good one. Have to start over. We have to cancel the game found. Start over.
No, of course.
No, please no. But it's a really good one, to be honest. Yeah.
No, but for example, one of the questions that's really one of the questions that I get a lot from my viewers in the comments of my lore videos, where they're like, for example, I made a video on the Great War a long time ago with a whole map with it and like Elder Scrolls Total War mod footage for like the battles. And then people, like, one of the comments that I got the most was like, how did this war take 5 years? Because in Oblivion, I literally walked from the south of Cyrodiil to the north in 1 hour or something like that. And then I always have to explain, yeah, but in lore, the world is bigger and
the video game is an abstraction of the universe.
Exactly.
Even if it looks realistic, it's still an abstraction. Skyrim is supposed to be this huge place, and you can walk from one side to another in an hour or 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe 2, yeah, but you can. You definitely can. So yeah, it makes sense that it is an abstraction. You have to treat it as that. Javier, Stefan, and I, the 3 of us, we come from the arts. We are all from the world of theater, and we have this approach to narrative that comes from there. Like basically, if it's not in the script, it doesn't exist. So if I'm working with a fellow actor in a story, and my fellow actor writes a 400-page backstory for their character, it's great for them. But that's not mentioned on the script, so that doesn't exist in the story because the audience is not going to perceive that at any point. They're not going to receive that information. So by the same token, if it's not on the video game, that's our script. And we can use all the other elements that we have at our disposal, all the lore, to build more, to encroach more. But our facts are the things that are said and seen on the video game. I mean, if there's something like 24 houses in Whiterun or 7 assassins in the Brotherhood, we're going to skip that fact and try to work around it.
Something that I personally wonder about in the campaign that's set during the Civil War, will we actually see or hear about the Dragonborn or not?
Yeah, it's mentioned. The Dragonborn is mentioned, and it's mentioned in a few instances. Not much, but there are echoes of the Dragonborn. Well, the Dragonborn does this, well, the Dragonborn does that, the people talk about the Dragonborn. All of that is there. It's a reality of the world. What does the Dragonborn do, look like, feel like? What kind of equipment do they use? Their gender, their race? I don't know. We don't know. That's up to the player. But it's mentioned.
Is there a sense of sort of progression of the Dragonborn story in the game so that you really find a sort of parallel story to Skyrim, or is it completely separate? Like, for example, when you start, there's no dragons yet, for example. I'm just saying something because, again, I don't really know the scenario. True. And then at the end of your Civil War story, you're hearing, the dragons have been defeated, or something like that. Or is
you don't get to that point, but yeah, but definitely yes. If you're one of the blades, one of the points of Dragonborn is rebuilding the blades, and I don't know what's happening with my memory today, but I forgot the name of the blade, the main blade.
Delphine.
Delphine, thank you. I was struggling so much. You meet Delphine. And she instructs you to do things, and she helps you out. She's there, so there's connection with the Dragonborn. There's direct connection. And if you want to go off script, you can imagine that your character becomes friends with the Dragonborn at some point, even with your Dragonborn, the one you played in the video game. So you can do all that fan fiction in your mind if you want, because the game allows that. It's very conductive to that kind of train of thought.
Do the blades, Esbern and Delphine, the main two from Skyrim, do they play a role at all in the story 25 years ago, or are they separate?
No, they appear in the second campaign as far as I remember. I don't think they appear in the prequel. I would need to check 1,000 cards. I'm not
at least not so prominently that you'll remember now.
No, they're not important at that point because there are other blades in the game. There's a few blades that are your besties, your best friends that you meet after in the first campaign, and they all have their own identities and whatnot. And there's a running joke with one of them, with Carillion the Hunter, who's a high elf, and nobody trusts him because he's a high elf, and he could be a traitor, he could be not, depending on many things. But every time anybody talks about traitors, like, oh, that Carillion guy, yeah, he is a high elf, the Thalmor, should we trust him? Give him a chance. He's just a bit annoying, but give him a chance. That's a reasonable thing to think. Even more, the miniature of the male high elf we have, I think, is wearing an Imperial armor, and that's in a way kind of an internal joke. Well, it's a high elf. He doesn't need to be one of the Thalmor. Give him a chance.
Yeah. Would it be even funnier if he had Stormcloak armor?
That would be hilarious. That would be real. You could paint it as Stormcloak in a stretch. That would be really funny.
One other thing that I wrote down, but I don't think I've watched the first look playthrough, and there you mentioned the High King. Do you also at one point give him like the High King of 25 years ago, which is supposed to be like the father of Torygg, the guy that got murdered by Ulfric? Does he have more of a role in the 25 years ago story, or is it just the visit to him?
He appears, he's mentioned, and the visit is a very important moment. I'm trying to remember if he has more of a presence, because at some point the Daedric princes are very strong, a very strong presence. Not always there, but they are leading forces in the story. They're quite a lot.
I'm not talking about the Daedric prince. I'm talking about.
I know, but that's the role that the High King could take in the narrative. The one leading the story and giving you the quest and giving you the.
Okay, like that.
Yeah, but the Daedric princes take over in that sense, because Skyrim, if it has anything, it has a very dark sense of humor. And the Daedric princes are very good with dark sense of humor. They're built for that.
Yeah.
To play cruel destiny jokes on the characters and their lives. It's like Greek mythology. The sense of humor of those gods was something to be considered, and a very cruel sense of humor as well.
Something I have to wonder though, and I don't know if this is a really specific thing, but in Skyrim, during the main questline and during the College of Winterhold questline, kinda. We meet Septimus Signus, who's like this guy who went completely nuts because he looked at an Elder Scroll many years back. Do we see him somewhere in the story, maybe in 25 years?
I don't think we do, but my colleague Stefano was the one developing most of the college quest lines. So I also was there, but he was the one most involved in that area, because we divided a lot our attention.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So it's impossible, and also because of personal taste and how you approach the things. If you're passionate about a faction, well, go for it, please. So that helped, but I don't think you meet that character at any point, because it was, if I remember right, we had a conversation about him, and it was complicated to make him into a part of the story. What you get to see is when Torygg dies. Well, right after he dies, you can be there.
That's really cool though, because that's something that people really wondered about, at least in the community. I remember making a video on Torygg himself and getting some comments on the duel itself, and the fact that we can get something on that in this game is really.
We keep it a bit fuzzy as well, but you get to see. You have the chance to save him, and you cannot take that chance. It's a bit of a trap. But at some point you think you could save him. If you know the game, you know that you wouldn't. But yeah.
I have to say, I really appreciate your dedication to keeping Skyrim's story to have fit in there, if that makes sense. Sorry for my English.
It is very important. You have such a rich source material. If you don't respect it, you are failing to your mission. And this kind of source material is giving you already so much, that just trying to retcon it or change it or creating a new alternate narrative that conflicts with the original one, it's not a smart move. I don't want to talk about anybody who has done that because it's not fair.
No,
But
of course.
it's the source material is giving you everything. You just need to be hardworking,
Yeah.
be aware, be very precise, and read a lot and respect it. And once you get all of those points across clearly, it takes you by the hand and guides you towards a new story. But you need to get to know that source story. You cannot just pretend to create a cool game that you like and then slap the logo on top. Because you may make a fun game, but you're not helping the canon of.
If I may ask, how much help did you guys receive from the writers at Bethesda Game Studios for the story, or did they completely leave you to your own devices to do your own research, or did you ask them regular questions, or what was their sort of involvement in this?
They gave us a lot of freedom. They were not sure what we were doing at the beginning because the project when it started, it could have gone anywhere. It's again quantum physics. I don't know why I end up there every time, but it was a Schrödinger project. Is it alive? Is it dead? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
But then we came to the approvals process, sending them. Okay, this is what we think the game is. This is what we think the story is. Read all of this, please. You have thousands of pages. Go on, read. And they did. And they gave us their pointers like, I mean, this is really cool, but this idea you have here, are you sure this is not great? This, for example, we had a story about a massive dragon, and their comment was, well, for what you're saying, this is bigger and more dangerous than Alwyn. I don't think we can have that. Oh, you're right. We cannot have a dragon that's more dangerous than Alwyn. Sorry about that. Let's change it.
Yeah.
It was a very friendly process where they gave us a lot of very good feedback. And whenever we went really off track in terms of lore, they told us, hey, don't go there, please. Can you not? But they were not imposing, and they were not censoring. They were more like trying to help all across. So it was a very positive relationship, and the way they understood our approach was really humbling in a way. It's like, oh, you guys are getting what we're trying to do and are supporting it. This means the world to us.
Yeah, I can imagine that must really feel really good. I am a bit curious though. I don't know if you can tell me, but you said that if you went completely off the hook with the lore, that they sort of said, well, should you really do this? Or maybe say, well, that's completely off the lore. Can you name any examples of things that you guys actually wanted maybe in there, or had ideas for, that they said, nah, this is not a good idea, other than, of course, something stronger than Alduin, or something that would completely conflict with the Dragonborn questline?
That's a big one. Yeah, Alduin is a big one. There was a lot of thing with names of characters, for example, because they have their rules for that and they make sense. So we don't have access to the same information they do. So often they would tell us, this name is not correct. This name shouldn't be here. But the thing is, when we submitted our stories, we had done our homework first. So they were mostly approving of everything. There were the small details. We never got to submit anything that we thought was crazy and that they agreed was crazy.
Yeah.
We had a few curveballs that, okay, if this flies, that's great. If it doesn't, it's okay as well. And they were okay with them. So I wish I could give you an example of something that we did like absolutely crazy, but I can't. I'm thinking of things that I could have had fun doing, that I said, no, don't even. I stopped myself before, like having strange relationships between Jarls that nobody knew about, like an affair between the Jarl of Whiterun and the Jarl of Morthal 25 years before. That would have been fun, but I didn't even get to propose it.
It would have been fun though, but yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from, where you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't propose that.
It could be a really fun story, but are you sure? Let's keep it out of the table.
Did you ever consider have considerations during the planning stage of like incorporating maybe other provinces, or was this always just about Skyrim?
We went through the whole motions. We thought about including not only other provinces but the whole world. And there's an interesting symmetry in Skyrim and the whole of Tamriel. Tamriel is composed of 9 regions, 9 provinces, and Skyrim is composed of 9 holds. So we thought, if we go for the whole of Tamriel, it's going to be a similar map with 9 big provinces and the same number of spaces in the board. Mechanically speaking, is going to be the same, and we will not have access to the same richness of lore that we have in Skyrim. I want to write about the Black Marsh, don't get me wrong. I think it should be fascinating, and the things you can find there. I don't know which kind of enemies you can find in the Black Marsh, but there must be so many weird things. But we cannot just create them from scratch like that. We can, but it would be a bit of a dangerous game to play.
Yeah, we have Elder Scrolls Online kind of for that, but that's also like 1,000 years in the past, so maybe not too relevant if you want to write something for the 4th era, of course.
Yeah, and also it's the same as before. You have such rich source material. You just need to take it by the hand and embrace it and move with it. If we go for another province that's not included in Skyrim, well, that fantastic companion that we have, which is the lore of Skyrim, is not going to be there for us anymore.
Yeah.
So we need to walk that path. That was a conscious decision, but we went throughout. We even had a moment that we discovered before submitting to Bethesda, where you had to had a whole chapter in a Daedric plane, and we created a map of sorts of that area, and you had to move around. And what I can tell you is that it was not working. It was not a good idea. We shouldn't have done that, and we regret everything. It was good to experiment with that, and some of that ended up in the main story. But we even got there. Not even another province of Skyrim, but a whole plane.
Yeah. I kind of get where you're coming from there, but my question basically came from the fact that I think that this format of this game, and from what I saw of the storytelling, it really puts you sometimes in the position of like telling stories that you can't really tell in the game itself. I don't know if you know what I mean. Are there any things in there where you think like, yeah, this is something that they couldn't have told in game, and we did, and we're really proud of that?
It's the teamwork. The main thing about that is the teamwork, because the game is a solo experience. Online is not a solo experience, but it's a very different experience. But Skyrim is a solo experience, and the board game is a cooperative experience. Even if you play solo, the story is taking you to different places. There are moments in the game where you have to face together with other players challenges. Like, for example, the Siege of Whiterun. There is a situation that you can arrive there or not, depending on your choices, where you have to chase an enemy through the Siege of Whiterun without taking part in the war, to get some information out of that person, while the rocks are falling around you, while the soldiers are fighting, and you to save your life, chase that person and interrogate them in the middle of the war as a team. So that's something that Skyrim couldn't do, because it's a solo experience. It doesn't allow that kind of narrative. It's a different thing. And also the time traveling, the moving 25 years in the future and having an older character. How long do you spend every time you play Skyrim? How long do you spend? But the average player, when they start, like, create your character, okay, this is going to be a whole day.
Yeah.
If suddenly the game tells you, well, now it's 25 years later and the character you created now looks like this. Oh, come on. No, why would you do that to me? No, that's horrible. That's a disappointment that doesn't happen in the game, because the mental image you have is yours, and it's sacred, and you manage it as you want. So 25 years can look really great to some people.
Something, though, like which hooks into the cooperative play. From what I saw, it's really fun to play with multiple people, but would you recommend this for solo as well, or not?
I definitely would recommend it for solo. It creates a different set of stories. There are rules for solo, and what we say always is that a cooperative game, at the end of the day, is a puzzle that's resolved between many people. When you play it solo, it's a puzzle that you resolve solo. If the puzzle includes a story, it's even better. The game is very playable solo. It's more difficult than with other people, yes, but you have the advantage of being in your own mindset without having to negotiate with other people. It is really fun to play solo. I played a lot solo, and since the whole COVID thing, we've been playing a lot of solo board games. Yeah, that's how we live now. Yeah, it's true, and it's an interesting discovery that you can actually enjoy playing a board game on your own. Something I barely knew before this. I knew, but it wasn't that clear as it is now. And this game is very playable in solo. It's really interesting because the stories are different. The stories are bound to be different, and the difficulty of the game is different, and the way your character, it's more epic, it's more heroic. The dimensions of your character, the scale is larger, because you are facing all of these huge problems, these world-destroying problems on your own, which means that you get all the XP and all the other mechanical elements. At the same time, your character becomes much more important. It's not just one of 4 or of 3 that did something great, but it's a totemic force. It's just like a demigod. It's, again, back to the Greek mythology. It's like Heracles. It's one of the Greek heroes. That's what you become. When you're playing in co-op, you're part of a party. It's more traditional fantasy in that sense, even though it's not traditional, but when you're playing solo, it's bigger.
Yeah.
So it's really fun to play solo. It's more challenging, that's for sure.
If I may ask, you say about the world-destroying problems that you face. Would you say that any of them are on Alduin's level, or are they all on a like smaller scale to?
They are different. That's the complicated thing, that they are not on the same. You cannot measure them by the same standard, because Alduin wants to literally destroy the world. It's very simple. If Alduin wins, we're gone, and that's it. If the forces that be win in the board game, your people are destroyed, your people are killed, or there's some dark influence in the world that is going to create a new terrible war in 20 years, or the whole of Tamriel is going to be drawn into chaotic situations that are less easy to perceive at first glance. It's not like scorched earth. That's why we're talking so much about Daedric princes, because they are agents of chaos one way or another, and when they get their way, well, bad things happen, but unless you're talking about Maroon's Dagon, they're generally more subtle in their approach.
So something that I'm wondering though, that which comes out of this sort of conversation is, are there any sort of things in Skyrim, like in the game, that maybe, like, I don't know how you say it in English, but where something in Skyrim was said which was kind of left kind of vague, which gap you kind of filled with the game. So for example, something which in Skyrim sort of references to the game, even though the game is of course made 10 years after Skyrim. So
there are plenty. There are plenty of those. You have, from, for example, the past of Mjolnir the Lioness. You never know where she comes from exactly. She gives you a few hints, and based on those hints, we weave the narrative of her story. There's the same with many characters that appear that you know what's the main story, but you don't really know what are the details and the meet and greet. Weaving those stories and basing a lot on them. That's a very important part. The same as with the Rich Men and King Madanak. You already know about that. Some things happen. For example, in Dawnguard, there's a lot in the comedy level, because I insist the world of Elder Scrolls is inherently funny on the surface. There's some very dark humor. There's a moment in Dawnguard that you can become that guard, that guy that walks around towns dressed as a guard saying, "Hey, I heard of reforming the Dawnguard, Pamperhand," because you're trying to bring people in, and you do that as an advertisement strategy. So you literally dress up as a guard and start walking around saying that so people can join. So even to those points, because when you go to the third stronghold in Skyrim, the third city, and you hear a guard saying the same, like, why are these people saying all the same? Why they have the same line of dialogue? Well, there's a reason. Because there's a guy traveling around, it's the same guy.
It's all the same guy. Hey, that's me.
And that guy is one of the characters from the board game. That kind of thing we're very keen on.
That sounds so awesome that it sort of fits like a jigsaw puzzle into some of Skyrim's sort of, I wouldn't call them plot holes, but into some of Skyrim's like gags and stories. That's really fun. I'm so excited to play this and to see what became of some of the stories. And the way this sounds, of like being a perfect sort of addition to, next to playing Skyrim, or maybe playing before your Skyrim playthrough, just to see like what kind of references there are in. I don't know. I just can't wait.
I mean, an interesting challenge has been to drop plenty of Easter eggs for people like you and me who actually love that universe, and for us to be able to catch that drift as we go, like, oh, this name, this character, this situation, this location, oh, this happened before, oh, and now I get this story, while still making it so the story makes sense and it doesn't alienate players who haven't, for some strange reason, played Skyrim in their life. I don't know if those people exist, but I'm sure there are some.
But
so.
Would you say that the story is also really friendly for people who've maybe like played Skyrim back when it released in 2011, but aren't really, well, they have a vague idea of what happened, but maybe they're not as familiar with the world anymore?
I think so. Even if you haven't played Skyrim ever, I think the story can appeal, because it's very, very explained in terms of, okay, you are this is happening. Now, this is your conflict. You're a character with a conflict. Anyone can relate to that. It's a story. And the extra layers of lore, well, you get to meet a young woman called Mjolnir the Lioness. Cool. I don't know who she is, but she's going to help me. Fantastic. No, but you don't know. She's well, okay, never mind. She's helping you. That's all that matters here. So that's there. It should be easy for people who are not super involved in the lore to access the game.
I don't remember if I wrote this down because I saw it or because I wanted to ask it, because I didn't put a question mark after it, but the Thieves Guild leader during your game is Gallus, right? No.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
At the beginning is not Mercer Frey. Mercer Frey is just a thief.
Alright.
He's just a thief.
Yeah, that's something that I was wondering, and let's see...
I don't remember if you get to meet him. I'm sorry, my memory today is a bit gappy, because I've been all day reviewing cards and things, so yeah, it has a negative effect on your brain always. Yeah.
I can imagine that makes it...
Yeah, it's hard to process more information at this time of the day, but yeah, we paid a lot of attention to that because we wanted to avoid getting a situation where someone who loves the lore like you goes and plays 25 years earlier. Yeah, Mercer Frey is the leader of the Thieves Guild. Oh, come on, let's flip the table. I'm out. We want to avoid that situation.
Well, I think that was basically most of the lore questions that I prepared. Yeah, honestly, it kind of feels like, well, it's of course not a video game, but it kind of feels like a sort of story DLC to Skyrim, which is just, it's so great to get sort of even 10 years after Skyrim. It's so fun to get like a new addition to the story, which I personally really enjoy.
Yeah.
All right,
we do. So really appreciate this chat. That was amazing, and it's so good to be able to talk to someone who actually understands the whole vibe and the whole involvement into making this good. Yeah, I mean, we have talked with many people who actually get it. It's not most of the reviewers and people in the industry understand this, but you have a passion that we really appreciate.
Well, I'm glad you do, and I really appreciate your time and you reaching out to me for the game. Thank you so much, and perhaps I'll talk to you someday in the future. Well, that was my interview with Juan. After our conversation, I have to say that it's clear to me that Juan and the team are very passionate about the game and are passionate about giving the players a good story. Players like me who actually know the story. I'm personally really looking forward to the game. Again, I'm not sponsored by this game, so this is not me talking for monetary gain, but I really would love to see what the team has come up with for the full story, since I only saw the demo, which has the first chapter of the first of 2 campaigns. Yeah, I'm so curious to see, especially since there's apparently also a lot of side quests with a lot of lore, and since the entire story has been approved by Bethesda, I see this as basically another piece of officially licensed lore, which I may or may not make some videos on once the game releases. Anyway, thanks again so much to Juan for his time and for sitting down with me, and to the company Modiphius and Chris Birch who made this all possible. I'll see all of you in the next video, which will probably be a regular lore video again. Don't worry about it. Thank you for watching, and again, love to Juan and the team.